Hey folks, David Stewart here. I'd like to talk a little bit more tonight about Alita Battle Angel and specifically some of the biblical themes that I noticed when I was watching this movie. These are things that I haven't seen a lot of people talking about on social media. Most of the discussion there seems to revolve around meta ideas outside the movie, like its success or why critics don't seem to like it, and a little bit less about some of the themes that are really embedded in this movie. But I noticed a lot of little biblical parallels, and I wanted to make a video on it. Before I begin, let me tell you that this is not allegory. I don't view Alita Battle Angel as being specifically allegorical in any sense. What it does uses a lot of themes and a lot of ideas that I think are drawn from the biblical tradition, and mostly with the Old Testament and a little bit of apocryphal stuff, especially the book of Enoch. Some of the stuff is really upfront and kind of easy to recognize. Other things I think are a little bit more buried in the symbolism. Right away, I knew that there was going to be some kind of symbolism with the title of the movie, Battle Angel. The word angel is not used in vain. And indeed, right when the movie starts, there's a little bit of a hint of what you're going to see with the world building with after the fall. So they have an event that they call the fall. And of course, the fall of man in the Christian tradition and also in a Jewish tradition is when Adam and Eve are cast out of the Garden of Eden. They sin, and then paradise is removed from them. And so indeed, that's what we're really treated to right away at the beginning of this movie is a world of filth, a fallen world, a world where the paradise really of today has been taken away from man because of some sin that we have yet to discover. And as the movie unfolds, we begin to understand a little bit more about what that event was. Now, before I go any further, by the way, this discussion is going to have spoilers, so if you don't want to know any of the specific plot details, you should probably turn this off now. Just watch my review that doesn't have spoilers and decide if you want to go see the movie. But as the movie progresses, we learn a little bit more about what this fall meant. And in fact, the fall was the literal fall of some of these floating cities, apparently. And we're treated to this image of this floating city at the beginning of the movie and throughout the movie. And as we uncover more, we find out that the fall involved battle between beings like Alita, angels, and whoever rules over these floating cities, which would be presumably other angels, other kinds of cyborgs that maybe are fallen angels. And so as we start to uncover what the fall means in the movie, this is not talking about the manga, but in the movie, we begin to understand that it is the result of some sort of, or it's a follow-up to some sort of primordial war, a war between angels, and that's really the parallel that we see. Now, the war between angels is mostly apocryphal. If you go and you look at the book of Genesis, there's really very little discussion of it, but there is a discussion of one important thing that I'll get to in a minute called the Nephilim that is also very prominent in the book of Enoch. So most of the information that we have about like an angelic war comes from what we'll call apocryphal sources like the book of Enoch. These are books that at one point were used in the religious tradition, but have been excluded from the canon, either in the Septuagint or in later versions of the Bible. So we also have more symbolism than just that. We have this city of Salem. In the movie, it's Salem. In the manga, in the original Japanese manga, I believe it's Salem. Salem is a city where there's a priest of Yahweh that I think Abraham meets. It's a city in the Bible, so there's an obvious biblical reference there. Now, why James Cameron and Robert Rodriguez chose to rename it Salem, I'm not sure of, other than I think Salem or Salem is the Latin name for the place Salem. I mean, the Spanish name for the place Salem. And they have moved the location of Junkyard, or what they call Iron City, to Latin America because it's part of a space elevator. And space elevators, because of the way that you have this balance between centripetal force, like spinning around the Earth, you can really only have it at or near the equator. If you have it offside, then it's spinning like this rather than spinning in a full circle. So the space elevator would have to be much longer the further away you get from the equator. Anyway, so that might be part of it. Might also be that in America, there's a lot of thoughts with Salem, not in a biblical sense, but witch trials, right? That may be why they did it. I didn't parse it out from the movie, and some of you may have more information from knowing additional stuff about the production, and you can inform me in the comments. So that's one of the things that you see there, and the image there to me is very obvious. You have this heavenly city literally floating above the fallen world. So you have this dichotomy between what the people in the fallen world perceive of as heaven, which no one can enter into, and only people can leave it. They can't go back to it. So we have this dichotomy. Now, of course, as we get deeper into the movie, we figure out that this paradise that floats above Iron City is probably not really a paradise, and is in fact ruled by Nova. And Nova means light, right? Or an explosive kind of light. And really, Nova is Lucifer. He is the devil, the morning star. So I think the parallels of those names definitely are played up by the filmmaker. And so he's kind of in charge. We're not sure if he's actually in charge of this city, Salem, but he's certainly running and highly manipulative and in control of the mechanics of how Iron City works. And he has many agents that work for him in Iron City for things that he's promised. And he has an ability to control people with his speech and by being able to see what they're doing. He essentially manipulates people through language. And this is something that you see in Milton's Paradise Lost with the character of Satan or Lucifer, is that he's very charismatic. He's able to control and carry people's thoughts just with his own charisma and his own language. And that's what we see with Nova as we start to learn more about him, and he's finally revealed as existing in the city. And so once we see this Lucifer figure in the city, everything kind of comes into a little bit stronger context, that this city is probably not a real heaven, but is really something demonic that is literally ruling over the fallen world. So you have the devil who rules over the world. So really what it probably is pandemonium. But it's presented as heaven to the people below. The people below really want to enter this heaven. But of course they can't do it. And no matter what they do, no matter how many works they perform for Nova, they are never really permitted to enter into the city. The only person who supposedly can enter into this amazing city is whoever is the grand champion of the sport that they have, the motorball sport that they do. So whoever is like the grand champion is supposed to be able to enter into this pandemonium, though we're not really sure if they ever are actually able to do it. And in fact, there's another layer too. When you see there's two individuals who are from Salem who are down in Iron City. One of them is Dr. Ito, and the other one is his wife. And his wife really wants to return to heaven. And it turns out the only way she returns to heaven is, spoilers, as a brain in a jar. So Nova doesn't actually take people and let them into the city. What he does take is their brains. And to me, this symbolism is that the devil can't take you body and soul into the heaven that he promises. He takes your soul. He takes your mind, your brain. He takes this permanent part of you. That's what he takes possession of. And there's lots of stories, lots of mythology surrounding the devil, the devil bargaining for people's souls. So the bargain often ends up being the cost of your soul, but you don't really, in a bodily form, get to enjoy the things which are promised, and you don't get to enjoy paradise. So in reality, it's like a mockery of heaven, and the entrances are basically hinged upon service to an invisible devil who never keeps up his end of the bargain. That, to me, is highly symbolic of this satanic antagonism that runs throughout the Bible. And then when we know that Salem's actually at the bottom of a space elevator, which I don't think is explored in the movie. I think that's really from the manga and is kind of hinted at in the movie. We see that the real heaven is actually above, and that plays into this angelic conflict that happens as we start to uncover the realities of this world, is that the real heaven is really like Mars. And so the angels, the cyborgs, the total replacement berserker cyborgs that come down from Mars to do away with the wicked people of Earth are really agents from whatever the true heaven is, that it's far beyond the earth. And so the promises of an earthly heaven end up, of course, being false promises. And that's one of the themes that I took away from this movie that I thought really made a lot of sense. Like, Alita is from the true heaven that wiped out most of the evil and fallen people of the earth. And then you have the main antagonist. Actually, I think he pulls a quote right out of Milton, which is better to rule in hell than to serve in heaven. That he wants to, and of course he's basically saying that the fallen world of Scrapyard or Iron City is hell, and he wants to rule it rather than to try to enter into services that exist in heaven. And there's a certain irony because he actually does symbolically serve in hell. The next theme that I thought was really, really big, but was much more buried and makes a lot of sense when you understand these references to angels and you've read, like, the Book of Enoch. And if you've never read the Book of Enoch, it's probably worth your time to read it just for the interest of the mythology there and the tradition. So the cyborgs are Nephilim. If you don't know what Nephilim are, it's barely referenced in the Book of Genesis. And the verse says something like the sons of God went into the daughters of man, meaning the angels married earthly women, and their offspring were the Nephilim, the great giants. Those were the heroes of old. I'm trying to remember the exact words of Genesis. I probably should have pulled it up for the video, but that's more or less what it says. Now, this is all expanded in the Book of Enoch. There's named angels, these angels that are called watchers, that essentially end up becoming involved in sexual relationships with humans, and their offspring they produce are immensely strong beings that are both a curse and are basically a curse to the regular people because of their great strength. And that's what you see with the cyborgs. The cyborgs, especially the cyborgs that are presented as these total replacement robotic cyborgs, the cyborgs that run in the sports, the cyborgs that are the criminals. These are immensely powerful beings. They've had their bodies completely replaced with metal, with machine parts. Even their faces are just kind of plastered fake faces upon mechanical bodies. And they're incredibly strong. They have weapons at their disposal. They're basically giants with human minds, and in some cases they're literal giants. So one of the main antagonists, Gruishka, he is a cyborg, and his body is literally giant. And the first time you meet him, you're used to seeing cyborgs that are more or less the size of people, and then you see him, and his body's been replaced with something much more immense and much more grotesque and bizarre, and he continues to get more bizarre and grotesque as it goes on. And in some ways, that's a symbol of his furthering the level of corruption that he has. Is that the more he's sinful and corrupted, the more insane and grotesque his body becomes. And that's also a contrast with what Alita's body looks like, which starts off being kind of innocent, young, and becomes more refined and more sleek and more powerful and more beautiful in a sense. So as she develops, her body becomes more perfect, thus reflecting her divine origin, and Gruishka's body becomes increasingly more grotesque, indicating his furthering involvement in sin. But the cyborgs are basically Nephilim, and you have this referenced in a couple of ways. So Ito and his wife are cast-offs from Salem. So they're from heaven. Essentially, they are angels in a sense. And what they both concern themselves with is cyborgs. So the creation of the Nephilim. So Ito's wife, she and him at one point made the most powerful cyborgs to do this incredibly dangerous like motorball sport. And that's what she wants him to return to doing. But he has sort of rejected that. So in his view, if we look at him as a bit of a fallen angel, the symbolism for him is that he's rejected the path of the Watchers from from the book of Enoch, and is instead attempting to exist in a purgatory that he knows he can't escape back to this false heaven, and just try to do some good in the world that he lives in. So he's a good half to these fallen angels, and his wife would be, I guess, the better half. Or the worse half. She's obsessed with going back to this heaven of Salem, and her main job is to make these immensely powerful, strong cyborgs. In essence, she is giving birth to them, these literal cyborgs. There's a little bit of Promethean undertones there, because we have the tainting of humanity with the divine that comes down from heaven and changes people from these just fallen people into cyborgs, these enhanced beings. So their touch of the divine from above is what ends up corrupting them, both making them stronger but also making them more wicked, because people, Adam and Eve were corrupted by a fallen angel in Lucifer and Satan. Right, so we have this biblical theme that runs throughout, that the touch of the divine can corrupt somebody if it's from evil, and often in very bad ways. So there's a little bit of Promethean undertones there, which is not, that's not Judeo-Christian. It's classical, but nevertheless, I kind of felt it there. And then you also have this contrast between Ito and his wife, where Ito has removed this mark off of his head. And to me, when I see the mark, I think of like the mark of Cain, right? As he goes east into the land of Nod, the land of wandering. So as they're cast out from, basically from their social circle, even though their social circle's fallen, they're cast out for some sin. Their sin is really having a daughter that is not perfect, in essence, right? So they don't really have a sin, but they're cast off, and she wears like this mark, which reminds me, makes me think of we put a mark on Cain so that no one will harm you. But he removes that, so that that symbolically separates them there. But that's kind of their main job, as they produce these Nephilim. The Nephilim are kind of rule over people, both as protectors in the form of the hunter warriors, and as antagonists that hurt people. And there's also something from the book of Enoch where the giants become so numerous and so many that you can't produce enough food for them. They're eating all the food, is basically what it says. So you have this black market of stealing cyborg parts from people to use in these for these ultra enhanced cyborgs that run this motorball sport. And so it really is a very interesting layer of symbolism there that I saw, with angels. And of course, Alita, in contrast to them, is a pure angel, right? She's not some Nephilim. She's not corrupted. She's not fallen. And her innocence and everything with the story that promotes her innocence goes right along with that. In essence, she comes from before the fall, where the fall corrupted man and brought him down to this decayed existence where they can't even maintain the fallen paradise that they live in. She comes from before that fall and is therefore immaculate. She's not touched by original sin. And Ito often or frequently remarks about how the city corrupts people, and even this boy that Alita's interested in, it corrupts him, and it corrupts even the good, is what he says. But it doesn't really corrupt Alita, and that's because she's immaculate. She predates it. So Ito and Chiron are basically watchers and parents to the Nephilim. That's the big theme that I saw there. The other thing, this is a thematic thing, not really an allegorical thing, as I mentioned, but you do see Alita as a bit of a nascent messiah, a messiah that's being born, kind of like Neo in the Matrix. So her angelic body originally is missing or destroyed, and she's placed into a new fallen human body, right? So that to me right away makes me think of Christology, that you have the divine spirit that's placed into a body, but is through the process of its birth a non-standard birth, immaculate. It's untouched by original sin. So once you have that kind of set up right at the beginning of the movie, that to me clues me in that I'm going to be seeing something that's messianic, and indeed we see that. This is one of the things about hero's journey kind of stories, is that there's always a little bit of a messianic level with it, whether it's Neo or it's Luke Skywalker, or it's something else. When you have the hero's journey as the chosen one, there's always going to be some messianic undertones, or there's usually going to be messianic undertones. And here's what we have here with this being born without sin, being born without the decay of humanity touching upon her. And then when she finally ascends, it's when she has her human body destroyed, and instead it's replaced with her berserker body, which realigns to her and shows her as she truly is. The first body they give her is a child's body, and it's intended to be a child's body, so she seems small, she seems kind of less than the people around her, and she seems very young, and that's to play up her innocence, and those big eyes are part of playing up the innocence. When she finally inherits her real body, she's an adult woman, she's in the full power, all those sorts of things. So there's an inbuilt moral certainty into her as a result of that. You see all of these messianic traits. She's willing to sacrifice herself for those she loves, including being willing to give up her heart, that sacred heart, in order to save this boy that she cares about, or save the other people that she cares about. There's a point in the movie where she's forced to look at the sin of this boy, and is kind of crushed by the realization that he's this criminal who steals cyborg body parts. And next to her is this cyborg who basically tells her that, part of being a hunter warrior, she has to judge people, right? So she has to look upon him and judge him and find him lacking, and that breaks her heart. And that to me is actually something highly, Christological, so to speak. She has a betrayal by that same boy who's really kind of like a Judas figure. This is something you see in a lot of things that use messianic themes. And then she, of course, attempts to redeem him by giving him, a new body, and by saving, literally saving him. And then he continues on his prior path, trying to enter into this false heaven of Salem, and it ends up costing him. And at the end, he says, thank you for changing me, which is can have a lot of deep reverberating messages attached to it, given that you have a little bit of this messianic arc. Again, I don't think it's allegorical. I think it's attempted to use the themes, not to present something that's just telling a previous story by other means. So Hugo's the name of the boy, and he's the one who ends up being this Judas, even to the point where she kisses him and then he betrays her, right? So even though the gender roles are reversed, the roles are not reversed. And then he becomes a fallen cyborg after that. After he sins, he becomes fallen. He becomes like this mechanical being, and ends up being destroyed as a result of that. So those are some of the biblical themes that I saw in this movie. I thought they were very interesting, so I wanted to make a little bit longer video talking about these. I'm not going to talk about these when I'll do a by the numbers analysis, which is kind of difficult to do because everything kind of flows together with Alita in a lot of different ways. Like the production supports the story, which supports the deeper layers of meaning. But I just wanted to talk about some of those biblical things because I thought they were interesting. Leave me your thoughts down below and sort of what interpretations you might have had from this hero's journey story and what you thought about it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. You can hop on my mailing list at dvspress.com/list. You can also find me at subscribestar.com/davidvstewart if you want to send me a tip there, or hop on the subscription list. I will be releasing a new novella in the Eternal Dream series soon, so you want to stay tuned for that, and you'll get it for free if you do it on Subscribestar. Otherwise, you can buy it on Amazon if you feel like that's something that you were interested in. And I'll see you guys next time.